Welcome back to another episode of the Pod About God. As always, we're super excited to be here. And today's a super fun one, a super interesting topic that we're really excited to talk about. And that topic is angels.
Yeah.
So to start off, we're kind of going to talk a little bit, and we want to get your guys kind of like your gears rolling. But basically, what comes to mind when you think of an angel? What does pop culture, the media, what do they all kind of want you to think versus what's a biblical one? But to start off, what do you think about when you think of angels, Kingsley?
I mean, I guess it's just from movies and like little illustrated Bibles growing up. You just picture like a dude who's got wings and is wearing just like a white sheet, essentially.
Oh, yeah. Well, don't forget the halo.
Yeah, the halo. Yeah, my bad.
Get the halo.
Like these giant white wings, fair-skinned usually. And I don't even know, do they have a certain like hair color, eye color?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
tall. They're usually
whatever.
tall.
Yeah, good looking.
Yeah.
Chiseled.
Yeah, good looking. Yeah.
I know we were lucky enough down here in Montgomery, Alabama to get snow a few weeks ago. We got a couple inches, which is a ton for us. I made a snow angel.
Nice.
Went in my backyard, made a snow angel. And it's got the wings, it's got the robe.
Confirmed, Angel's still active today.
That was fun. I know that with a lot of the new AI stuff, some people have been making what they call biblically accurate versions of angels, and they kind of make the videos, they type in the passages to show you what they are, and it's kind of spooky.
Yeah.
When you think of a biblically accurate angel.
Yeah, I'm sure. Is that on TikTok? I'm not on TikTok. So
I'm not either.
Okay, well,
I've seen it on Instagram though. But
I
you could
assume if it's on TikTok.
Yeah.
Or sorry, if it's on Instagram, I assume that means it was on TikTok like 2 months ago.
Oh goodness.
And now it's made its way to the older people on Instagram.
But it definitely is.
Twitter,
it definitely is cool, kind of just get that AI view of it, just biblically describing. And who knows if it's 100% accurate or not? There's no way to know. But it's kind of cool to look at it as okay, it's not a dude in a robe with a halo.
Yeah. So that's a really good way to start. Whatever our common perception of angels might be, I think most of us are going to think of like the guy in the white robe.
Yeah.
Or actually, there's a lot more. We think of like the little fat babies.
Oh yeah.
With wings.
Cupid.
Yeah. We think of like Cupid, or we think of like just a beautiful woman. So we think of some kind of just stunning female. That's bright, shining, that kind of thing.
The baseball team out of Los Angeles.
Yes.
There's a lot of misconceptions around angels.
Or you think of is it Christopher Lloyd, the actor's name?
Oh,
have you ever seen Angels in the Outfield?
I have.
Okay,
oh, yeah.
Good, awesome,
Great
fantastic.
movie.
So I was listening actually in prep for this at Madison Church of Christ. This is just great timing. They also did a sermon series on angels pretty recently, so it was great research for us. And Andrew Itzen, in one of his lessons, mentioned what he pictures when he pictures angels. Very similar to what I picture. It's Christopher Lloyd like lifting a baseball player in the outfield so he can catch a ball. But whatever your influence is for angels, what our goal is in this podcast, and we should be able to get this done in just one episode, but there's a ton of stuff on angels.
Yeah.
What we want to do in this episode is ground you in Scripture about what the Bible has to say about angels. And there's a lot of stuff we don't know about angels, but you might be surprised by the amount of data we have in the Bible about angels. I think they show up like 294 times, and I didn't write that down in the notes here, but definitely just did it at the desk a couple hours ago when I was running through this stuff. I don't know why it's not in the notes actually. But they're mentioned almost 300 times.
Yeah, I had a very basic understanding of angels, but after doing a lot of studying, prepping for this podcast, there's a lot of stuff in the Bible about angels and a lot of very cool stuff. Interesting stuff about angels that I did not know that I'm glad I learned about. And hopefully we can share some of those stuff with you guys.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is wrangle all this data about angels in the Bible, or the passages where angels are mentioned pretty much. We're trying to wrangle those into three main categories. The three main categories are the nature of angels. So in other words, what are they? What kind of beings are they? What are they made out of? That kind of stuff. The second question we want to answer is about the status, I guess, of angels in terms of like their rank or position, their relationship to the rest of the spiritual realm. I mean, this whole series is about the spiritual realm. And we'll also get into some discussion there of their status compared to humans and the physical creation from Genesis 1. But then thirdly, and the main thing, I think is where the meat of the discussion is the function of angels or the roles
Yeah.
that they serve. So we'll just go ahead and jump right into it because we don't really have much more time to introduce stuff. Okay, so first thing, the nature of biblical angels, and just a few like preliminary thoughts here on what we mean when we say nature. Nature, we mean in the sense of the actual being, or the fancy word here is ontology. So, like, what is an actual angel as a being, or what's it made of? That kind of stuff. What do they look like? Any questions like these that are related to what an angel actually is. And again, there's more that we don't know than well, we do know, but I think you might be surprised here of the stuff that we have. So basically, the summary that we've come up with is this. Angels are spirit beings created by God that have chosen to honor and serve him. And so pretty much everything else we say is just a breakdown of that. I think, Copeland, you had a good quote.
Yeah, so Saint Basil the Great, he wrote extensively on.
He's a great dude.
Yeah, he's one of the early church fathers from 329 to 379 AD. Kingsley knew him real well. But he wrote extensively of the nature of angels and acknowledging their spiritual purity and how they serve of messengers of God's divine plan. In one of his books, this is the quote he said. He said, "Angels are pure, intelligent spirits whose entire being is dedicated to the service of God. They are sent to earth to deliver God's commands and to protect those who seek God's grace."
Yeah, I really like that. Can you read that first part of that again?
Yeah. The quote
Yeah, just
says,
the first part of that quote.
"Angels are pure, intelligent spirits whose entire being is dedicated to the service of God."
That's great. I think that's a really good definition.
Safe to say, Saint Basil really hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, probably better than we did with our summary, but I don't know. I mean, who knows? That's not for us to decide. But either way, the content's the same. What are they? In one way, it's very simple. They're spirit beings that are pure and submit themselves to God and do whatever God wants them to do. That's what they are. So let's kind of push into this, though, and analyze a few of these things. Or reason through it is more of what I'm interested in. I'm not so much interested in just analyzing for the sake of analyzing. Because when you tell me an angel's a spirit being, my brain, I've got a lot of questions there.
Oh, yeah.
And we've covered some of these when we talked about God,
Yeah.
Father, Son, Spirit, and we said God's a spirit. What's a spirit? So what's an angel? Angels are referred to as Elohim, and we've already been through this. So as a spirit being in Psalm 8:5, he's made humanity a little bit lower than the heavenly beings or the angels or the Elohim. Psalm 82:1, these are passages we've already looked at. God's taken his place in the divine council in the midst of the gods or the Elohim. He holds judgment. So we know that angels are spirit beings, whatever those things are. And we're going to come back to that in a second when we talk about their appearance. But let's just hold that. Point number one is they're spirit beings. They're not physical beings. So whatever they're made of, it's not atoms like we're created with, something else that's not of this world. So the second thing, though, is they're created by God. So, Copeland, if you've got Nehemiah 9, I'll go over to Colossians 1. But if you want to catch Nehemiah 9:6 here.
Yeah, Nehemiah 9:6 reads, "You are the Lord, you alone. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them, and you preserve all of them, and the host of heaven worships you."
Okay, so God's made the heaven of heavens, and all of their host, and the earth and all that's on it. So any living being that fills the heavens, God has made. And the host of heaven is shorthand for the angels that are in heaven. So host is like a military term that's, refers to like the armies of heaven pretty much, who are the angels. So God's made the angels in heaven. And then also in Colossians 1:16, for by him, speaking of Jesus here, by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. So these phrases here, thrones, dominions, rulers, authorities, phrases that can refer to like earthly entities, but more often refer to spiritual realities, especially in the writings of Paul. And we'll see that again in Ephesians. I think we opened up the whole series with that. Our battle's not against flesh and blood, but against, powers and principalities and spiritual forces of evil in the high places. So angels are definitely created by God. They're spirit beings that are created by God. And then this next question is sort of a side note. that commonly gets asked, though, how many angels did God make? And, well, we don't even have this in the notes, actually. But angels don't procreate. We do know that. And that's barring a whole discussion on, like, the Nephilim in Genesis 6. And we're going to get to that in that episode we do on demons, which is next, so that'll be fun. I'm sure we won't get any questions about that in our Q&R episode. But Hebrews 12:22. Copeland, you got that one?
Yeah. So, I don't have the full verse. I just had the little spark note of it. 1 second.
Well, either one of those is fine. But I'll filibuster for you while you get over there. But a common question about are angels, well, how many were made by God? And then did he, like, make a clump of them and there's still the same ones that were there when he made them? Or do they reproduce? Are there more angels now? Is God still making angels? Like, all these kinds of questions. But Hebrews 12:22 gets us the beginning of an answer.
Yeah, it says, "But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly."
Okay, so some translations will give you what I've got here in mind: innumerable angels in festal gathering. So, however many angels there are, there's a bunch. There's one passage that talks about, I think it's in Revelation, about myriads and myriads and thousands and thousands. Myriads is probably 10,000. So, a bunch is the idea, more than you can count. So, the host of heaven is very large. There are lots of angels. We don't see any evidence that they continue to produce more angels or God continues to make them. It looks like he made them, and we still have the same angels that he created before we were created at some point. And, well, maybe we can do some of that stuff in the question and response episode, but for now, let's keep moving forward. So we've got spirit beings created by God. The next thing is angels have free will and agency. So in other words, they can make decisions about what they want to do. They can either obey the will of God or they can reject it on the one hand. So 1 Peter 2:4, if you've got that one.
"For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains and gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment."
Okay, so angels can sin. They can make a decision to follow God or rebel against God. And again, that'll be relevant in our discussion on demons and Satan in the next episode. But, so in the one sense, they can decide between right and wrong. But this one's more interesting to me. In 1 Kings 22, Micaiah is going before Ahab, and you might be familiar with this story. Ahab is basically working with one of the other kings to go into battle against one of their common enemy. And the other king's like, hey, you need to ask your prophets. And he does, and they all say, go into battle. And he says, are there any other prophets? Can you ask another one? And he says, there's one other prophet, but he never prophesies anything good about me. He only prophesies evil. And it's Micaiah. And so they ask Micaiah, and Micaiah says this in verses 19 to 23, but we don't need to go all the way to 23. I think we just need to go to 21. You got that over there?
Yeah, 19 through 23.
Yeah, but not all the way. Just in where it says entice him. That's
All right.
That's where we're going.
All right. And Micaiah said, "Therefore, hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right hand and on his left hand. And the Lord said, Who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing, and another said another. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, I will entice him."
Okay, so this is a crazy story here, and I think definitely is a good window into what's happening in the spiritual realm daily. So God is sitting on his throne, and the host of heaven is standing around him on his right and on his left. So it's like God among this, well, as we've talked about earlier, that phrase that gets used, the divine council from Psalm 82, I believe it is. God sits in the midst of the divine council and holds his judgment. So it's not that God needs help or they needs guidance, and we'll come back to that later. But I think we learned something about God and the fact that he's here with the host of heaven. He says, all right, we need to entice Ahab. Who's going to do that, and how are we going to do it? And so he's listening to essentially the ideas of the host of heaven here, these angels coming forth with these different ideas. So on the one hand, angels have free will to decide whether or not they're going to obey God or rebel against him. But on the other hand, they have free will to just come up with their own ideas and suggest things, which is wild to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So free will made by God, spirit beings, and then next, and this is probably what everybody's more interested in here, what do they look like? So when Joseph sees that angel appear, what does he see that comes to tell him about Mary? Not to put away your wife because this child is from God. What does he see when the women go to the tomb and the angel is there? What do they see? And we've got a few different categories of angels, right? And they appear in different forms.
Mm-hmm.
So what you got over there?
I think the first one we're going to look at is the cherubim.
Okay.
I mean, when you think about angels, I think 4 or 5 things come to mind. You have the archangel that comes to mind.
Yep.
You have Gabriel and Michael.
Yep.
And
Those
then
are the only 2 that we actually know their names.
Yes, and then you have cherubim and you have seraphim. I think those are kind of just like the main ones that come to mind. So the first one we're going to
maybe the angel of the Lord.
Which
you've got that one covered, right?
Of
Copeland
course.
has all your questions answered about the angel of the Lord, but we do want to go ahead and mention here, we're not really talking about the angel of the Lord in this episode, but we're saving it for later.
Yeah.
Because the way we understand it, the angel of the Lord's not necessarily in this same category, in the sense that he's a being created by God who's lower than God.
Yeah.
So we can say more about that later, but
Yeah, we'll answer it before the series is open. So stay tuned.
yeah, Copeland's got that covered before we're finished.
Okay.
All right, sorry to interrupt you. Cherubim,
Yeah,
go for it.
We're going to start off with cherubim. Kingsley, we're going to start off in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 5 through 14, if you'd read that.
Sweet. Okay, good. I'm glad I get to read this. All right. As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the fire, as it were, gleaming metal. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. Interesting to me here that it says the likeness. I think that's going to wind up being pretty important. But the likeness of 4 living creatures. This was their appearance. They had a human likeness, but each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. And the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each of them went straight forward without turning as they went. As for the likeness of their faces, each one had a human face. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side. The 4 had the face of an ox on the left side. And the 4 had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. And their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wing of another, with 2 covered their bodies. And each went straight forward. Wherever the Spirit they would go, they went without turning as they went. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. And the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning, and the living creatures darted to and fro like the appearance of a flash of lightning.
All right, so that's a lot to unpack. It's a long passage, but what's we're focusing on here is the appearance of angels. So that's
Yes.
kind of what we're going to go for here.
Yes, so many details.
So yeah, let's spark note it real quick into a few just short little notes.
Sweet, I'm ready.
So real quick, they have 4 faces.
Correct.
That's going to be a human,
Yes.
a lion, an ox, and an eagle.
Yep.
And then they have 4 wings. It also tells us their feet are like those of a calf, and they sparkle like burnished bronze.
Yeah. So is that their? And I'm wondering out loud here: is their feet are sparkling like burnished bronze, or their whole body? I don't know.
I don't know. I'd have to.
I'm gonna guess it's the feet because later on it says the whole likeness of the creatures is burning coals of fire and torches, and the fire was bright, and there's lightning coming out of them.
Yeah.
So like, just try to picture, and I guess this is where the AI thing comes into play, because like I'm just trying to picture if I saw like a great, like really dark storm cloud rolling up, and in the middle of that there's something like shiny, gleaming metal, and then I look a little bit closer and I see these things,
Yeah.
that are like look like they're on fire with lightning shooting out of them, 4 wings. Oh, they got human hands under their wings, don't they?
Yeah.
We skip that? Yeah. Under their wings, they had human hands. So they've got like these wings, hands under. So it's like, do they have arms under the wings, or is it just they have hands under the wings?
Yeah. So it's definitely. And another thing is
Wild.
they move in unison without turning.
Yeah.
Explain to me how that works. Like,
Yeah. And those
what?
wheels are with them too.
Yes, it's
Which we're not reading about the wheels right now, but
it's very weird. And you may be thinking, so far it hasn't even called them cherubim. If you keep reading down in Ezekiel chapter 10, verse 20, it identifies them as being cherubim. But also, if you want to open up to Revelation chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. If you don't have it pulled up, I can read it, but if you do,
I'm gonna try to get.
I'm not as good as filibustering as you.
I got you. Revelation 4. What?
Oh yeah, Revelation 4, verses 6 through 8.
All right, Revelation 4, 6 through 8. And before the throne there was, as it were, a sea of glass like crystal. And around the throne, on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, the third living creature with the face of a man, and the fourth living creature like an eagle in flight. And the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes around and within, and day and night they never cease to say, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come.
So, as you see here, they're not exactly the same, 4 wings compared to 6 wings, but still, it's the same general picture, 4 faces. It's still a little bit different. But some little ancient cultural context is really important when we're talking about cherubim to start off, and it's going to be for cherubim too. The term cherub is going to come from the Mesopotamian word. You can't judge me for how I pronounce these things. I'm no kind of ancient.
No judgment here.
Yeah, no, Kurabu is, I think, how you say it, and that's going to be important because in Mesopotamian culture, these pictures and icons of cherubim-like fixtures were depicted as hybrid creatures.
Yeah.
So what you're going to see is they were seen in Assyrian and Babylonian art or culture and iconography as winged bulls or lions, human heads, guarding temple entrances, or guarding deities of these cultures. So they're going to be seen as some kind of guardians. So when it comes to, hold up, I might want to talk about seraphim before we kind of break it down.
That's all right. Well, I think this idea of and I think Michael Heiser puts it this way. So Michael Heiser, very recently, his work's become very popular. The late Michael Heiser, actually. But his work became very popular because he does a really good job being thorough into the nature of the spiritual realm. And really, some discussion on that is what launched our idea to do this season on this topic. But it's like these gods in the ancient world have this like entourage with them.
Yeah.
And it's not like they're on the same level as the god, but they're also some kind of spiritual being that, like you said, is doing something, whether it's near the throne of God, like you said, like guarding the entrance to the temple as you walk in, or something else.
Yeah, but either way, kind of the depiction of what they are is going to be familiar to the Israelites. They're kind of going to understand what it is. And I want to look at seraphim real quick before we kind of dive deeper into this.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I think
is it symbolism or is it literalism? Is that how they're supposed to look? So diving into seraphim real quick, because they're pretty similar to cherubim. So the Hebrew word seraph is going to have 2 meanings. One is a noun; it's going to mean serpent, and the other is a verb meaning to burn. Not to burn, to burn. So a lot of scholars, ancient scholars, have believed that seraphim means burning ones based on the verb seraph. And that's not 100% accurate. Who's to say it is, who's to say it's not. But I think we can get a little bit of clearance if we start in Isaiah 6. If we read verses 1 through 4, it's going to give us a little bit description of seraphim. And we're going to see they're different from cherubim. They don't look the same.
Yeah, so in Isaiah chapter 6, and I've only got verse 2 here, so I'm going to go read it. Isaiah 6, you wanted 1 to 4?
Yeah.
All right, so Isaiah 6, starting in verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke.
All right, so 2 things we want to clear up right off the bat. So you just read that passage and you're comparing it to the Revelation passage we just read in our head. You're probably wondering, okay, they're both saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. Are they not the same thing? They're both doing the same thing. Are they both the same jobs? But then you say, hold up, they look different.
Yeah.
I mean, let's go over what the seraphim look like. Again, it says they have 6 wings, 2 covering their faces, 4 covering their feet, and 2 for flying.
Yeah.
We both know that they're both capable of speech because they're both proclaiming God's holiness.
Yes.
So we're kind of confused here as, okay, are they the same thing? Are they not? They look different. We're getting different, it appears. But let's keep reading. Let's read up on seraphim. So remember earlier we talked about the word meaning serpent. So in that ancient Near East context, the throne guardians and kind of on the same level as what you spoke about earlier, being kind of in the same realm. A lot of times in this Egyptian culture, they were pictured as serpentine creatures.
Yeah.
Cobras. I know I was reading a bunch of stuff that said cobras. You kind of can all picture the snake that can expand the skin on their head and can make kind of that like circular thing. A lot of ancient scholars would say that they were described, and people in that time would describe them as having wings.
Yeah.
So you could picture the snake you could picture the cobra with his head flaring out the side of his head, saying that it had wings.
Yeah.
And a lot of times these Egyptian artists, they'd exaggerate this trait when drawing it in their iconography and stuff as winged serpents by putting wings on snakes.
Yeah.
So it's a familiar image to the Israelites, the way that the seraphim is being described in this Isaiah passage. Also, another really cool fact is some of these serpents, like cobras, at this time could spit venom, which could burn the eyes, reinforcing just kind of a weird thought of the fire, the association that seraphim have with fire and burning. And that's completely just an assumption, but it's something cool to think about.
These images would have been a lot more readily accessible to somebody living in that ancient Near Eastern worldview.
Yes.
Or even, like, obviously, that carries over certainly into the New Testament era with a lot of these things from just ancient Judaism. You know, you're still in your Old Testament, in the New Testament era. That's what they're raised on, you know, these Old Testament. So a lot of these things are carrying over. And I think what we're getting to, this is something we wanted to say for the end of this section, but I think it makes sense to bring it up right now. Like you mentioned earlier, is this the literal picture of angels? And not all angels are cherubim.
Correct.
Not all angels are seraphim.
Yes.
But all cherubim are angels and all seraphim are
Yes.
angels, because they're
Yes.
spirit beings created by God, lower than God, not intended to be worshipped. But we're getting to some of that stuff in just a minute here. So the question now is, at least for cherubim and seraphim, if I could take a picture of these angels, is this what they would look like? So is this the literal picture of them, or is there something else going on here? There's a couple things to think about with this. One, if this is the literal appearance of these cherubim and seraphim, and we didn't get to some of these passages. I know there's one in Job about the angels being created before the foundation of the world. So the host of heaven, holy ones, and I forget the exact phrase. We can go back and add that in, or maybe do something with that in the Q&R episode. But either way, if angels truly look like this, and they have, like the cherubim, for example, have the face of a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle, and they're created before the world and all the animals and humans in it. So when oxen are made, when humans are made, when eagles are made, when lions are made, you know, do we look like cherubim? You know, that were oxen made to look like one of the faces of a cherubim, but just with the body. So the idea here is that they represent something. So the eagle represents swiftness, right? The lion represents power. The ox represents strength. And the human face obviously represents, well, now I'm blanking.
You said obviously, so you better
Yeah.
have it.
At least that intelligence and the image of God sort of thing that we have. So when we think about this picture in Ezekiel also, though, we got to remember that these four living creatures are basically they're underneath this slab that's clear like glass, and on top of that slab is sitting God. And God is depicted as the likeness of a man, who is, I believe, from the waist down fire and from the waist up metal. I might have that backwards here. But either way, he's fire and metal. So when you think of God, is God himself, like if you were to take a picture of God the Father, if that were even possible, would he be in the likeness of a man who's half fire and half metal? Well, no. No, probably not. But he's depicting himself this way to Ezekiel to demonstrate something, that God is powerful. And so what you have with these living creatures, we're demonstrating something about their nature. Not necessarily that if you could take a picture of them, this is what they would look like. But they present themselves in these ways. So if we have this big question, which is one of my big ones, what is an angel? Like, what? I know, like in the general sense, okay, it's a spirit being created by God with its own free will and agency. But like, what's it look like? Arms, legs, what's it made out of? These kinds of things. You don't get a answer about necessarily the quote ontology of an angel. You don't get that. Now the ancients, though, they thought of this in terms of so sometimes angels are even referred to as stars in the Old Testament, commonly associated with like the sun and the moon and all these kinds of things, and the heavens, host of heaven, so all these kinds of things. Their idea was that angels were made out of something that like they would refer to as ether. Sometimes we still use that phrase today, but basically it's like light material that's not from the natural world. Like it's just some kind of, I mean, it's the way they thought about it. That's not saying that's what it was, but just to help our brains put this in terms we can understand. Some kind of material that's still a material, but just not anything like what we have here at all. And they viewed it as something radiant and bright, so think about purity and power. So wild stuff to think about.
And I think it's super important here to read these passages in context. And remember that, I'm pretty sure, mistake me if I'm wrong, but Ezekiel and Isaiah are both receiving visions here.
Yes,
these are both visions. So when they're trying to explain something, it's got to be something that they're familiar with for them to understand it. I mean, the purpose of the vision is for them to understand things so they can write it down and share it with people. And so they can know what's going on. And what would it do if they hadn't seen an angel and they knew nothing what they looked like, and it just showed this figure and they couldn't understand it at all? And there's times we see stuff like that where people can't understand things in the Bible. But what they do is, in Isaiah's vision, he's familiar with Egyptian imagery. So what does it do? It reflects that.
Yeah.
And then in Ezekiel's vision, he'd be more familiar with Mesopotamian imagery. So it reflects that. And it kind of gives them a little bit, I think, of an edge to kind of be able to not completely understand, but understand a little bit and at least kind of know what's going on, understand the power, understand the point of why they're there, maybe somewhat, kind of understand the power, the guardian aspect along those lines.
And I think this idea of the likeness of these things is it's like four living creatures. And they've got one face but see, when it gets to the faces, though, they have the face of a lion. It's not like, well, they have the face, but it kind of looks like a lion, but it's not really, it's the closest thing I can think to tell you it looks like with a lion. He's got the face of a lion, but these things, it's what they're like. It's not necessarily what they are, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
They're like a lion in the sense of maybe power. They're like a ox, maybe in the sense of strength, and all these kinds of things, but they're not just like a mashup of a lion and an ox and an eagle and a human, with calves' feet, with wings. That's how they're presented here. But they're presented a few more ways in Scripture. Sometimes they appear in the form of men, though. This is not cherubim and seraphim. Cherubim and seraphim, that's what they look like when they show up. But some angels appear in the form of men. We see that in Genesis 18, and for the sake of time, maybe we shouldn't read all of these because we have some that we want to read later.
Yeah.
But in Genesis 18, when the angels, those three men, appear to Abraham, and Abraham kind of goes crazy. He's like, he calls them Lord, essentially. They're called men, and then two of the men leave, but it says Abraham remained and spoke to the Lord. So it's like one of those is one of those three men was like an appearance of God somehow. But then the other two men go to Lot. And in that section, they're referred to as angels and they're referred to as men interchangeably. So they're angels, they're not men, but they appear as men. So whatever angels are, we know they're spirit beings made by God with their own free will. But they can take on the appearance of men. Somehow they can take on the appearance of men. And we see that a few times. So let me go ahead, and I know I'm kind of moving around in the wrong order, Copeland, here.
I mean, I got one right here.
I want to do the bright light and white clothing, though, real quick, and then we'll move there. So Matthew 28, when the stone rolls away, and there's a big earthquake, and an angel appears. He descends from heaven, and his appearance is like lightning, and his clothing is white as snow. And then when you look in Mark 16, that same angel is described as a young man. So that's where our image a lot of times comes. That's why those paintings and stuff from that era, they're like from that Renaissance era especially, we think of some kind of brightly, clothed human or the appearance of a man. And we've got two more that appear in Daniel where angels look like men. So if you got Daniel 8:15-17.
Yeah. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Uli, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O son of man, that the vision is for the time of the end.
Okay, so this vision seems like he sees Gabriel from afar, and he sees the appearance of a man. And, well, Gabriel's an angel, takes on the appearance of a man here. But Daniel 10:5-9, this gets into more, I think, of that. We get a few more details, and it's more familiar to our understanding of angels. So if you've got Daniel 10:5-9 here.
I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen, not a lemon.
Lemons.
A man clothed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, and his face like the appearing of lightning. His eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. For the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled to hide themselves. So I was left alone and saw this great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. Then I heard the sound of his words, and as I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face in a deep sleep with my face to the ground.
Okay, so you'll see here some of the same terms like burnished bronze, lightning, and fire. But this angel doesn't, well, he's not a cherubim. He looks like doesn't even say he looks like a man. He says, I saw a man. Actually, just saw a man. But he's describing here an angel. So these spirit beings, this is the way they present themselves, but is that actually what they look like if you could take a picture of them? No, doesn't seem to be the case. But another little side note here is the response that people usually have when they see angels. They usually are terrified.
Yeah.
They usually fall to the ground. Joseph was terrified
Oh,
when he saw the angel.
if I saw a cherubim or a seraphim,
Yeah.
either one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. But here, even just the one that looks like a man.
And
Like the one that looks like a man
crazy.
terrifies him.
Like you read the description of cherubim and seraphim, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's scary.
Yeah.
But you read this one, like they said, just being described as a man, and they're still scared.
Yeah, but he's like, it's like he's made out of, this gleaming rock here with beryl. He's like lightning, flaming torches, burnished bronze, all these kinds of things. And what's really interesting to me, so down here, like my radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. So he's he's so terrified to the point where he's going to describe that I have no strength left. But then this next part, I think there's a really cool connection to the Gospels here. When he heard the sound of his words, he falls on his face, and it's like he passes out. He goes like into a deep sleep on the ground, and then like it wakes him up right after this in the next verse. But do you remember in the Garden of Gethsemane when he says, "Who do you seek?" And they say, "We seek Jesus of Nazareth." And then Jesus says, "I am he." What happens to him? The guys that come to arrest him, they all fall down to the ground when he says, "I am he." It's like, well, why do they fall down? It's some kind of power behind what Jesus is saying there. And I think that is some cool imagery, maybe calling us back here, maybe not, but certainly makes a whole lot of sense to call us back here. When he heard the sound of his words, he just falls to the ground.
Yep.
But some cool stuff about the response to angels. So we've already covered this. Is this what angels really look like? It seems to be, well, maybe not, but we are definitely intended to learn something about angels from the way they're described, the way they look, at least. So we learn a lot about their power, like the wings could symbolize they can move quickly. They shoot around like lightning. That's what we just read in Ezekiel. So they move quick. They're able to travel. There's really no big deal for angels to go from the spiritual world to the physical world. They don't have any difficulty transitioning between the two realms. Is another really important thing about angels. They see everything, their eyes. They're Um, they know what's going on in the creation. And a lot of these other things that we mentioned. Okay, so I feel like that's at least a pretty good start, though, on point number one of the nature of angels.
Oh, yeah. What's our time at?
Long. This is why I said we might have to bust it into 2 episodes. And we still might, but let's just
keep going.
let's keep working here.
Number 2,
The
status.
Yep. Status of angels. In the sense of, and just some preliminary thoughts here too, in the sense of their rank and position. Not there's a lot of other ways you could say what's the status of somebody, but we just mean like the rank and position within that spiritual realm, because that's what we're trying to do. So, summary here, they're spirit beings who are not equal to God, but they are above humans, at least prior to the resurrection. And that's going to be...
We'll dive into that in a second.
Yeah. So, one, they're lower than God. So, they're part of the Elohim, but they are not the Elohim. And we brought this up in the episode on God the Son. We talked about Jesus. So, Revelation 19:10, if you got that one.
Then I fell down at his feet to worship him. But he said to me, "You must not do that. I'm a fellow servant with you and your brothers who hold to the testimony of Jesus. Worship God."
And that's speaking about the angel that John sees there.
That's a little tiny bit of content. John's receiving the revelation.
Yeah.
He starts worshiping the angel. Angel says, "No, I'm like you. Don't worship me, worship God."
Yeah, so he's below God, certainly, below God the Father. He's also below God the Son. So Hebrews 1, basically the whole chapter compares Jesus to the angels in a lot of ways because he's stressing the deity of Christ. Hebrews chapter 1, if you can get verses 3 and 4.
Yeah. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as such superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs.
Okay, so Jesus has become very superior to the angels, as much as the name he has inherited is better than theirs. And he's God, so the name that he's got is the name of God. So he's way gone above the angels now. And then he's going to give you a few examples from Scripture about how God the Son is greater than the angels. And the first one is in, the first one's in verse 6. And I know I didn't put this in the notes here because there's too many. The first one's in verse 5. In verse 5, to which of the angels did God ever say, "You're my son, and today I've begotten you"? Or again, "I will be to him a father, and he will be to me as a son"? But I think verse 6 really summarizes a lot of this, if you've got that one.
And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him."
Right, so the angels actually worship God, and we saw that already.
Yeah.
But just to make things clear here, angels are lower than the Father, lower than the Son. In some ways, though, right now, like in the present age, angels are higher than humans. They're of a higher order than humans. So Psalms 8, 3-5. You got that one?
When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is a man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor.
Okay, so you made him a little bit lower than these heavenly creatures. Humanity's crowned with glory and honor, but we're still a little lower than the angels. So then, though, in Luke 20, and you might be familiar, this is one of the common misconceptions about angels, that are angels are they just humans that have died and have gone to heaven? Do we turn into angels? And that gets, it's been popularized big time in pop culture, especially that movie, It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a happy thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's a happy thought. But
Is it biblical?
Humans become like angels, is what Jesus says when he responds to that question from the Sadducees, because they try to corner him with this question about, okay, well, if there is a resurrection, because Sadducees, by the way, they don't believe in any kind of spirit or soul or angel or anything like that at all. And that's why they're sad, you see. Yeah.
I was singing. I was one step ahead of you. I was singing the song in my head.
Awesome. Nice. Oh, I don't know the song. What's the song?
Oh, it talks about, I don't want to be. It talks about a Pharisee, a hypocrite, and a Sadducee.
Sing it. I didn't ask you to describe
it. He goes, I don't want to be a Pharisee. I don't want to be a Pharisee because a Pharisee aren't fair, you see. I don't want to be a Pharisee. And then it's Sadducee. No, that's the Sadducee one. Because the Sadducee is sad, you see.
Yeah. And a Pharisee's not fair, you see? I like
no,
that.
No, it's not that. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I'm old. I forgot.
Okay. Google it.
About the Sadducee, it says, because Sadducees are sad.
We'll release a music video
for
the next episode of Copeland going through that song. Sing-along video. But I don't even remember what we were talking about. Okay,
were
yeah,
talking about-
Sadducees, yeah.
Sadducees.
They ask him, about this hypothetical situation of, well, there's a woman who's married to, one of our brothers, and he died. And so, like, the next of kin is supposed to take care of her. So his brother marries her, and there's 7 brothers, and she winds up being married to all 7 of them because each of them, pass away. So the question is, in the resurrection, then, whose wife will she be? And it must have been a good question because, like, if you're trying to stump, like, one of the leading rabbis that nobody else can stump, you're going to take your best question to him. And Jesus just responds, he's like, you're wrong because you don't know the power of God and you don't know the scriptures, which is something wild to say to these guys that were actual experts in the scripture. And he's like,
I've studied it from when they were able to read.
yeah. And he's like, no, you guys don't understand what you're reading and you don't know the power of God either. And then at the end of it, I think it's in, is it here in the account in Luke? But one of them at the end of it says, you are quite wrong. And I love that. Right? He just really kind of lets him have it. But in Luke 20:34-36, we find one of the answers, and this is parallel in the other 2 synoptics. But if you can read this for us.
The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to attain that age and to the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, for they cannot die any more, because they are equal to angels and are sons of gods, being sons of the resurrection.
Okay, so equal to the angels in terms of status, not in terms of, like that big word we used earlier, ontology.
Yeah.
We don't become angels. We're still resurrected humans, but we do become equal to the angels in the sense of status that we are like sons of God now. Like we're a part of that host, not this one, if that makes any sense. So we don't become angels, but we do become among them, I guess might be the right word. And in the other synoptics, the idea is you become like angels in the sense you're not given in marriage. So equal to humans in the resurrection, at least in terms of status, above humans in the current state, but below God. And then 4, we do want to talk here just a little bit about ranks among the angels, but we don't have much time, so we're not going to say much about it. Basically, among the angels, you pretty much have, like the cherubim and seraphim have certain jobs to do. The angels seem to be more organized around the jobs that they do, but you don't really see many categories. You just have cherubim, seraphim, and an archangel. He's not spoken of as like the archangel. He's one among, looks like archangels, but the only one we have mentioned is Michael. So Michael from Daniel 10:13. Can you read that for us?
The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia.
Okay, so this is that angel that we just described from Daniel 10 a minute ago, the one that was like, looks like a man, but he's like his eyes are like fire, and he looks like beryl and all that kind of stuff. Not a beryl, like beryl in the sense of like the stone from the ancient world. So he says, like this word prince is commonly used in Scripture to describe angels. So like a ruler, which gets us to the function here in just a minute. But Michael is one of the chief princes. So he's not the only one. He's one of them. Daniel 12:1, if you got that one.
At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people.
Okay, so called great prince. And then Jude 9, when the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing with the body about Moses, and it says basically didn't condemn him or didn't, presume to go ahead and punish him and to not allow God to do that, basically. And then can you read Revelation 12:7?
Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon.
Okay, so Michael has his own angels here. He's described as an archangel in Jude 9. He's one of the chief princes in Daniel 10. And there's a lot of stuff from the intertestamental period in Judaism. There's another archangel mentioned in there. His name's Raphael, but not in Scripture. But there is...
Turtle.
No, not the Ninja Turtle. But you've got Michael. Someone said the other day, you've got Michael.
Angelo.
Yeah, that was it. Michelangelo, Raphael. You're just missing 2 more. But in the intertestamental period, there is a focus on angels. And you can say within Judaism, they sort of start to develop their views on angels, and they like put them in a hierarchy and all that kind of stuff. But that's in the non-canonical Jewish works. That is in, we'd refer to them as the Apocrypha. That's deuterocanonical, in other words, so of
That's not a word.
secondary status, but not actual canon. Uh, and that leads us into the function of angels here. So you can kind of see what Michael's up to and what these other princes are up to, or these other angels are up to, and it gets you into some pretty cool territory. So finally, here at the end, and we're coming up on 50 minutes, so we should be able to do this in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, if it's an hour and 10 minutes, okay.
Yeah, if it's too long, we'll bust it into 2 episodes in the editing process. But here we go. Third, the function of angels. Just one preliminary thought here. Function in the sense of what do they do? So we've talked about what they are, and we said what the nature of angels. The big question is what they are.
Yeah.
We said the status of angels. The question is like, what do you mean, like in terms of their rank, or like how they relate to other created beings, and then how they relate to God, obviously other spirit beings, I guess. And we're not really talking about demons here, but essentially, as I understand demons, they're spirit beings just like angels. The difference is what they do, or like what they've decided to do. They're spirit beings, but they reject God. So the devil said to have his own angels. But here, we're talking about their function in the sense of what do they do. And to me, it's much better to think in your head of what angels do. That gives you a better idea of what they really are.
Yeah, it can definitely help you grasp them.
Yeah, so like what you mentioned in that original quote of, they're pure spiritual beings that, what'd you say, have submitted themselves to God's will?
Just read it again real quick. It's right here.
Yeah, I really like this.
Angels are pure, intelligent spirits whose entire being is dedicated to the service of God. They are sent to earth to deliver God's commands and to protect those who seek God's grace.
Love it. That's a really good way to describe angels. It encapsulates a lot of stuff that can get really, dense when you go through it, but it gives you a short version to keep all that stuff in your head. So one thing, though, I want to talk about in the function of angels, they do serve on this, quote, divine counsel, to borrow a term from Psalm 82. Now, again, to go back to what we discussed about Elohim in that first episode, we're not saying there's other gods. Like, that should be extremely clear by now. There are no, like, other capital G gods. There are other spiritual beings, but none of them are like God. So in Psalm 82, verse 1, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, Elohim, lowercase g gods, he holds judgment. And then again in verse 6, I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. And then in Psalm 89, 6-7, can you read that one?
Yeah. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? A God greatly feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome, able to call who are all around him.
Okay, so there is this council, and you get a picture like this a few times. You get it in Job once, of like the sons of God are presenting themselves to the Lord. But I want to go back to this example we've already used in 1 Kings 22 about Ahab and Micaiah, the prophet. So I want to read some of this. We're going to read a little bit more this time, but just kind of picture what's the role this angel is filling here. So in verse 19, Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right and on his left. So there's your, quote, divine council or whatever. Your host of heaven sitting around God, but God's at the middle of it. He's directing. The Lord said this, who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? One said one thing and another said another. But then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord saying, I will entice him. So there's a few spirits coming, well, I could do this. Or I could do that. Or why don't we do this? Or why don't we do that? But then there's one spirit that comes and says, okay, I've got an idea. I'll do it. And then the Lord says back to him, by what means? So how are you going to do this? And he says, I will go out and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of his prophets. So it's like, this is just wild to picture. But you've got, at least the way it's depicted here, is God among this heavenly host. They're bringing him ideas, and he's collaborating with them, working. Now, God doesn't need any help.
Yeah, it's so weird to think about.
He doesn't need ideas, but you know what? Like in 2 Corinthians 5, Paul says God has entrusted to us the ministry of reconciliation, and he makes his appeal through us, so we are ambassadors. Does God need Paul to be his ambassador? No, like absolutely not. He does not need Paul. Jesus does not need the disciples in Matthew 28 and Mark 16 to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every living creature. He doesn't need them to do that, but he invites them to do it. In Genesis 1, I mean, we can go all the way back. Does he need humanity to rule the earth and have dominion over it? No, he doesn't need them to do that, but he still invites them to do it anyway. So we learned something about God and his relational nature and all these kinds of things, but it's just kind of wild to picture God with this host of heaven, and they're bringing him ideas. But this spirit says, I'll do it. And then look what God says to him. You are to entice him, and you shall succeed. Now go out and do so. And so Micaiah says to the king, now therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all your prophets, and the Lord has declared disaster for you. So it's like, this is how this happened. Like one of the spirits, one of the angels here said, this is how we're going to get this done. And God's like, you're right. That's how we're going to do it, and you're going to succeed. Now go and do it. And I think that's a really good picture of the role that angels fill, at least as this, quote, divine counsel. And don't misunderstand us here. We're not saying it's like God needs the advice of the angels to figure out what to do. No, God very well knows what to do, but we learn something about his nature in the same way we learn something about him where he invites humanity to co-rule over the creation. Which leads us to the next point. Angels are also, like humanity, is given authority as, have dominion over the earth and subdue it, that sort of thing. Angels seem to be given similar kind of authority, but certainly on a different level than humans. So Daniel 10:13, if you can read that one for us.
The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to me for help, for I was left there with the kings of Persia.
Now this gets a little crazy. So the prince of the kingdom of Persia. And then you get to Daniel 12:1, Michael will arise, the great prince who have charge of your people. So there's like a prince here where we're speaking of angels. There's an angel that's like of the people of Persia. And then there's one that's over the people of Israel. And you can see that angels are given, and sometimes it's geographical. And there's some really cool stuff about like the association between gods and the actual land where those gods ruled in the ancient Near Eastern. So like in the ancient Near Eastern worldview, the Egyptian gods are not God over everything. They're just the gods in Egypt.
Yeah.
It's like when you walk into Egyptian territory, this is where the Egyptian gods rule. So they're in charge around here. So like when you get to the 10 plagues, no, they're not. The Egyptian gods are not in charge around here. The God of Israel is in charge around here. When you have the Ark of the Covenant being taken by the Philistines, and they take that ark, back to the temple of Dagon in, help me out here, it's in 1 Samuel, right? Chapter 6. I'm pretty sure it's in 1 Samuel 6. They take the Ark of the Covenant back to the temple of Dagon. Well, what happens to the temple? The image of Dagon, they come back and they find it fallen on the ground. They pick it back up. They come back, they found it fallen on the ground. His arms and legs are cut off. And so they're like, okay, Dagon's not in charge here. The God of this Ark of the Covenant, the God of the Israelites, is in charge here. So that they give you a detail that says they never step foot across that threshold again because this belongs to Yahweh. It doesn't belong to Dagon. So there's some crazy stuff in the ancient Near East that certainly this could be accommodation, and this is just how God's describing this to Daniel through this vision. But we at least see that the angels have like dominion, very real authority given to them, and when that's actually lying behind the context, or not just lying behind the context, it's in the actual text in Psalm 82, if you want to go read that on your own time. We don't necessarily have time to do that now. Okay, so function of angels. 1 Kings 22, they're in the room, so there's like this divine council. They're rulers and stewards. Thirdly, though, and this is the thing I think we mostly think of as messengers. So that Greek word angelos actually just means messenger. So you don't have to be a divine being to be an angelos in Greek. You just got to be a messenger. But the angels are so commonly associated with bringing God's word. And there's way too many passages to illustrate this. So we just have two. Hebrews 2, verse 2.
For since the message declared by angels proved to be reliable.
Point here being the message that, so like the gospel, a long time ago, and many times, in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. And then here it's said, well, that message was declared by angels. So angels are like the intermediary. And you get that in later in Hebrews as well. But then Matthew chapter 1.
But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying,
So the angel of the Lord appears to Joseph and like tells him what's going on.
yeah,
Tells
another,
him the plan.
yeah. Also in Luke 1, verse 26, you see Gabriel announces
Yeah.
Jesus' birth to Mary.
Yep.
Cool little side fact: Gabriel's name means God is my power. It's a pretty cool little description.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's very cool. So they're messengers, and that's primarily I think what we think of. Fourthly, angels are warriors, and they bring God's judgment. So think back to that Genesis 12 episode. Well, when you're moving forward, not 12, was it 14? Maybe I'm getting them mixed up. Back to that episode where the angels go to Sodom and Gomorrah and destroy the cities. Like they bring about the judgment of God. So God judges the city, but He does it through the angels. Similar like that message of reconciliation we talked about in 2 Corinthians 5. I'm getting too excited about this stuff. So you see the angels of God. It's God that does it, but the angels, like He sends the angels to go and execute it. It's God that reconciles the people to Himself, but He makes the appeal to humanity through humanity. So it's still God is still the one doing all these things, but the angels bring about that will, whether it's to take a message, whether it's to rule or to, bring a message to somebody, or if it's to help have dominion, or if it's to be in that divine council sort of a thing, or if it's to be a warrior and bring about judgment. We already read the verse about Michael and his angels going to war against the devil. So then the last thing here, though, ministers. They're ministers. So Hebrews 1:14.
Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation?
So again, this is in the context of the Hebrews writer making a contrast between the angels and Jesus, saying He's superior to them. He says, aren't they all ministering spirits? So they're sent to serve for the sake of those who inherit salvation. So angels are ministering spirits that are supposed to serve the people that are to inherit salvation. And then in Luke 22, in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus prays and Luke describes, he says he has sweat like drops of blood. It's how it's described in Luke 22. You got 22:43?
Yeah. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him.
So the angel strengthens him. And we see that again we saw it previously, I guess, in the temptation of Jesus. Like an angel appears to him, strengthening him. A ministering spirit. And then Matthew 18:10, this is one of the controversial verses about angels now.
See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven.
So this is the passage about guardian angels. So does every child have a guardian angel? And there's, again, some development of that stuff in intertestamental Judaism. But one thing that we can note here is this doesn't necessarily tell you there's a guardian angel for every believer. It's just angels, the kids have angels watching over them. So that's not exactly the same thing as saying like Copeland's got one assigned to him, Andrew's got another one assigned to him.
Yeah.
They each have one. So like all of Israel, remember in Daniel 12, has one angel assigned over them. They have Michael assigned over them. So it's not like a proof text. You can't go there and say this is a proof text for guardian angels. But that's not the point. The point here is that there are angels watching out for the little ones. Like there are actual angels watching out for them. Whether or not it's like a guardian angel is not really at play here, at least the way we think of guardian angels. And then there's another verse, I can't believe it's not in the notes here. You might have this one in yours over there from Hebrews about entertaining angels unaware.
Oh, yeah.
You know that one?
Except right here. Hebrews 13:2. It says,
Yep.
Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels without knowing it.
Okay, so this brings into mind, like, well, what are angels doing today? Like,
Yeah.
how prevalent are angels right now? So are angels watching over my kids? Are angels watching over me? Have I ever invited someone over for dinner or, like, given them money on the side of the road and that was actually an angel?
Yeah, I mean, you read about it. I mean, we've talked about it a few times today about the angels in Sodom. In Genesis 19, Lot sees the two men arriving at the city gates and offers them shelter. And it says the wicked men of Sodom did not even recognize that they were angels, and
Yeah.
they attempt to attack them.
Yep. Yeah, so the point I think there in Hebrews is you wouldn't know anyway.
Yeah.
So, like, it's not, I don't know that we should this isn't an invitation to look back on, you know what, that time I did this, I wonder if that was an angel. Or, there's a really nice person. I wonder if that was actually an angel. It wasn't a real person. Angels can appear as humans. We do know that. Hebrews says you might entertain an angel unaware, which leads me, I think, to the last thing here. Leads us to the last thing here. Whatever else angels do, we do know they can move back and forth between the spiritual world and the physical world very easily. Very easily. So they're very involved. And I would argue that angels are probably more involved in our day-to-day lives, in most cases, than we are willing to admit or than we recognize. Maybe not willing to admit. That's a little strong.
Yeah.
But I would say angels are more involved in our daily lives than we recognize. So I think back again to another episode in the Old Testament where Elisha's, they're surrounded by an enemy army, and Elisha's servant gets up and he looks out the window and basically sees all these armies outside. He's like, oh no, what are we going to do? And he goes and he wakes up Elisha and is like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And Elisha prays for him and says, essentially, open his eyes so that he can see. And his eyes are opened, which is a really interesting phrase. That's the same thing said of Adam and Eve in the garden, when they eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. His eyes are opened and he sees the army approaching, but he also sees innumerable chariots of fire. And he sees like this other army that he could not see previously, but now he can see. And they're described in similar ways to these other angels. It's like the host of heaven is there to fight. And that host of heaven in the text winds up defeating the enemy king and his army. So are they involved? Well, they're certainly involved all over the place in the Old Testament. Now, it's not always revealed how they're involved. And you don't find people making a lot of claims that this is an angel, this was this angel in these episodes, unless God actually reveals to them, this is what's going on. Ahab, no one would have known what happened with Ahab had God not revealed that to Micaiah. We would have just thought, okay, well, Ahab's prophets are lying, and they decide to lie of their own free will, which they do, but we wouldn't have necessarily said, well, God must have sent a lying spirit to them to get him to say something to Ahab. But that did happen in the Old Testament. So, and I guess you could argue things about God's operation in the Old Testament versus God's operation in the modern world in the era of the Messiah, in the kingdom of the Messiah. But certainly the way that Jesus describes the actions of angels and the way that we see the Hebrews writer talking about angels, they're still involved in the lives that you and I live. And I do wonder, though, how many of us are actually more like Sadducees?
Yeah.
Where, we believe in a resurrection, we believe in a soul, we believe in a spirit, but we don't believe in angels. Or we might believe they exist, but we don't think they do anything.
Yeah.
So what do we think they're doing, though? If angels are not active in the world we live in now, you'd have a very hard time describing what they're doing. They do praise God. They're in the throne room of God, but that's not all they do in Scripture. They have other roles and other jobs under the authority of God the Father, and as we read in Hebrews, even under the authority of the Son. So lots of really cool stuff about angels.
It's such a deep thought to think about. And if they're not doing tasks, like you said, what are they doing? It's just so strange to imagine. Okay, are they sleeping? Are they getting sent out one by one? Are some of them praising while some of them are on earth? Are they swapping out shift? Like the whole idea of what's going on is it's crazy.
Well, I tell you what's even more weird, and I left this out here, but go read up on the manna and how they describe the manna. The manna is called like the food of the angels. It's like the angels eat. And then Elijah, like Elijah runs away and he hides. He's by the brook or whatever. And I think it was the birds bring him food. And I got to make sure I've got this right because I wasn't planning on saying this. So I'm just kind of going off the dome here. But
fact check him.
He eats the bread and it sustains him for 40 days. So like, eat? That's a whole thing.
Is the food they eat more powerful?
Yeah, I mean,
more nutrient.
Or is it just like a metaphor? Yeah. But there's some wild stuff too with that. But a lot of interesting things. But one thing, I guess, point of application to take away as we wrap all this up. Just like humans are made in the image of God to serve alongside God, but definitely underneath His authority. And that's the big problem in Genesis, is they throw off that authority. That's the same problem with the angels that are subjected to punishment, by the way, is they try to throw off the authority of God and do their own thing. But just like that's the intent for humanity, it seems like that's the intent for angels in the spiritual realm. So there's a very close correlation to what humans are supposed to do in the physical creation, what angels are supposed to be doing in the spiritual world or in the heavenly places, that kind of thing. So some cool stuff here.
Yeah. So quick recap.
Yep.
Quick little recap.
You got it.
Oh, goodness. Number one, it's going to be really quick recap. Number one, their nature. We know that angels, they're created by God. We know that they have free will. We know that they're spiritual beings. We know that God created a lot of them.
Yeah.
On to the next
Don't
one.
know how many, though.
We don't know how many. Thousands or innumerable.
Yeah, there you go.
Number two, appearance. Throughout Scripture, we're going to see them listed different ways. You have the cherubim looking one way, seraphim looking one way, Michael looking another way. A lot of times it's going to be imagery kind of to some way describe or show their power, what they represent, who they are.
Yeah.
But like Kingsley said, if you were to take a picture of them, is that what they'd look like? Is that what they'd look like to us? I guess there's no way to really know. Who knows?
We don't know.
We don't know
Maybe it is.
if it would be something we could understand.
Yeah.
And then number three, we're forgetting about where they rank. They're above us,
Yeah.
but they're below God.
Yeah.
That's an easy way to put it.
Yeah.
Number four, their functions, what they do. We see that they're messengers. They're not only messengers, they're warriors.
A lot of these other things,
Yeah,
too.
they're ministers, they
they're
praise
helping
God.
out. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think a really important thing is just to remember the bigger picture, in that God's ultimate goal is to get humans back into his presence. And in the meantime, God's going to use angels to serve, guide, and protect us as his people.
That's a great way to wrap that up. That's good.
it's
That's
a
why we
short
give
way.
you the conclusion around here.
Goodness.
Because
Well,
that'll
there's
be way too lengthy.
There's a bunch of stuff. Like we said, this is an episode. There's a lot of stuff. Have your Bibles out. Read up on it. Get your gears turning about angels. It's not all the answers. Certainly not all the answers about angels.
Oh, yeah, no way.
Any questions you have, add them put them in the comments. Like we said, we're doing a Q&A episode at the end. We're like we said, Q&A, not question answer, Q&R.
Yeah.
Question and response.
That gets us out of feeling like we have to actually give
if
you
we
the answer.
Yeah, if we can't answer it, we'll at least try to respond.
Yeah, we'll respond.
Make sure to stay tuned next week's episode on demons. That'll be a fun
That's
one.
going to be another big one like this one. But another really interesting topic, and I think the point everybody wants to get to, number one, I don't really know what these things are.
Yeah.
Number two, I don't know what they're up to today.
Number three, do I need to be scared going to sleep at night that one's breathing on my neck? No.
Oh, man. I hope nobody's like listening to this late at night in bed
Yeah.
and you just like, they're not sleeping now.
Yeah.
Now they're just going to remember The Exorcist.
I hope not either.
Yeah. But yeah, that's going to be an interesting episode, and that will be out next week. But yeah, send us questions. We enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.